A disturbing new development in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. The masked individual may have appeared at her residence on an occasion prior to the night authorities believe she was abducted. This information comes from sources intimately connected to the ongoing investigation. The central photograph in this sequence, disseminated by the FBI, depicts the suspect at Guthrie's threshold, notably without a backpack. Investigators theorize this particular image was captured sometime before February 1st, the very day she vanished. The FBI has clarified that the other images, which show the suspect carrying a backpack, were taken on the morning her disappearance was discovered. Nancy Guthrie is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, a prominent broadcast journalist. This evening, the Pima County Sheriff revealed to CBS News that his investigators have not dismissed the possibility of an accomplice, someone who might have gained entry into Nancy Guthrie's house. This statement comes as Sheriff Chris Nanos confirms that the doorbell video of the masked male is the only footage they have successfully recovered from several cameras installed at the property. At 2:28 in the morning, something inside Nancy Guthrie's residence went quiet. It was not a scream, nor was it a security alarm. It was the signal from her heart monitor, which had ceased transmission. Mere minutes before, a figure cloaked in black had been positioned outside her front door, observing the camera with an unnerving familiarity, as if aware of its precise location. Then, the feed went dark. Now, weeks into the investigation, authorities claim to have unearthed new evidence that might finally point toward a suspect. But what they found changes the entire narrative. The DNA recovered does not belong to a random stranger. If this holds true, the incident was never a matter of chance. Investigators now suspect that the first profound error in this case was not made by the perpetrator. It was made by everyone observing the events unfold. For weeks, the collective focus was fixated on the scene outside Nancy Guthrie's home. The masked figure, the disabled camera, the razor-thin window between the last recorded motion and the moment her medical device went offline. However, according to recent investigative briefings, that entire sequence of events is being re-evaluated. Law enforcement sources now confirm that the timeline is no longer anchored to what happened at the front door. It begins inside the house itself. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, had arrived home just before 10 p.m., following an evening spent with her family. She resided alone in the Catalina foothills, a quiet enclave of Tucson, Arizona. The neighborhood was consistently described by residents as peaceful, residential, with an exceptionally low crime rate. Nancy had lived in Tucson for decades. She navigated her home with independence, despite some mobility challenges, relying on daily medication and a heart monitor connected to her telephone. Nothing about that particular evening seemed to signal any cause for alarm. At 9:50 p.m., her garage door closed, a detail meticulously confirmed by surveillance timestamps. For nearly 3 hours, the property remained dormant. There was no sign of unusual activity. Then, shortly after 1 a.m., an individual dressed in dark attire approaches the front of the residence. The doorbell camera manages to record partial footage before its lens is physically blocked and, ultimately, deactivated. Authorities would later confirm that the camera's housing bore clear signs of being forcibly tampered with. That grainy footage was made public by the FBI. But this is precisely where the new intelligence becomes critical. For weeks, the prevailing assumption was that the masked person disabled the camera as a prelude to gaining entry. Investigators are now intensely examining a different possibility, that access to the home had already been secured. According to officials close to the case, a digital forensic analysis of Guthrie's phone and home automation systems indicates interior activity occurred before the exterior camera was ever compromised. While authorities have been tight-lipped about the complete details, they verify that the timeline of events occurring inside the home is undergoing a fundamental reassessment. This revelation alters the entire complexion of the case, because if entry happened earlier than first thought, the event was not opportunistic. It was premeditated. And that leads directly to the newly discovered evidence. The FBI has now confirmed that DNA collected from the property is not a match for Nancy Guthrie or any of her immediate relatives. That genetic profile was uploaded into CODIS, the nation's combined DNA index system. The search yielded no matches. When a DNA profile fails to produce a match in CODIS, it generally signifies one of two scenarios. The individual has no prior convictions for a qualifying offense, or the sample belongs to someone whose identity is not yet in the system. In response, investigators have now broadened their forensic strategy, moving beyond the limits of CODIS. Although authorities have not publicly specified the advanced methods they are employing, law enforcement officials have confirmed they are re-examining additional biological evidence that was gathered from both inside and outside the residence. This includes trace materials that were recovered during subsequent searches of the property. Such a return to the scene is not standard procedure. When investigators reprocess a scene after the initial sweep, it strongly suggests that new information has come to light or that earlier discoveries demand a more scrupulous review. In the Nancy Guthrie case, detectives re-entered the home days after their primary search had concluded. Evidence markers were laid out once more. Certain items were recatalogued. Digital devices were subjected to further examination. The reason for this, according to official sources, was a growing sense that something in the initial evidence did not align with the narrative. The entire investigation now pivots on a critical 16-minute window, the span of time between the last known exterior surveillance footage and the moment her medical device went silent. 16 minutes. For weeks, this narrow slice of time was the absolute focal point of the case. Now, however, investigators are operating under a new theory, that the sinister events of that night were set in motion before that 16-minute clock ever began to tick. If this theory holds true, it points toward a perpetrator with a disturbing familiarity of the property, and it is precisely this chilling possibility that has caused the investigative lens to narrow. Despite the shift in focus, authorities have consistently and publicly maintained that no official suspect has been named in the case. Sheriff Chris Nanos of the Puma County Sheriff's Department has taken pains to emphasize that his investigators continue to explore all possibilities. The FBI has publicly echoed that same position, and yet, this official line stands in stark contrast to confirmed reports of multiple searches conducted at one specific residence. That residence belongs to Annie Guthrie, the victim's daughter, and her husband, Tommaso Hayon, who live approximately 4 miles from where she was last seen. An examination of public records confirms that investigators have twice descended upon their home. The initial search was reportedly consensual. The second was authorized by a court-issued warrant. Law enforcement has offered no explanation as to what new information prompted this significant escalation. Officials have also remained tight-lipped about what, if anything, was taken from the home. But the procedural significance cannot be overstated. A second search warrant is only granted after investigators present a judge with compelling evidence of probable cause. This is not simply a matter of procedural repetition. Its issuance signals a firm belief within law enforcement that further evidence pertinent to the case is located at that address. While this does not equate to an assumption of guilt, it marks a profound and deliberate intensification of scrutiny. Tommaso Hayon is officially the last person documented to have seen Nancy alive. He was the one who drove her home on the night she vanished. It is a fact that has been confirmed by both family and investigators alike. In any high-profile disappearance, the last person to have seen the victim alive almost always comes under immediate and intense examination. This is simply standard investigative protocol. What separates this situation from the standard procedure, however, is the timing. Sources with intimate knowledge of the investigation report that law enforcement's focus has been trained on specific, unexplained movements that took place in the hours immediately after Nancy was dropped off at her home. While the nature of those movements remains confidential, they have been pieced together through a silent witness. Digital tracking data, including everything from vehicle movements to cellular activity, and electronic timestamps, all of which are being painstakingly reviewed. This is the new evidence alluded to in recent briefings, not a sudden confession, not a dramatic arrest. It is a quiet, methodical digital reconstruction. Modern criminal investigations are fundamentally driven by data. From the simple alert of a door sensor to the complex triangulations of phone pings, from the black boxes in our vehicles to the routers in our homes. Even when video surveillance is incomplete or absent, the metadata left behind often narrates a more precise, unblinking story than any human eyewitness ever could. Officials have confirmed that multiple, disparate data points from the night Nancy disappeared are currently being synchronized to forge a precise, minute-by-minute reconstruction of events. That meticulous process is still underway, but it has already culminated in the identification of what investigators are terming a person of interest. Authorities have refused to publicly name this individual. They have, however, confirmed that the focus of their investigation has sharpened considerably. When directly questioned if family members had been cleared of suspicion, Sheriff Nanos offered a carefully worded response, stating that no one has been fully eliminated from consideration. That is a profoundly significant statement. It communicates, in no uncertain terms, that this remains an active and fluid investigation. It also serves as a potent reminder that any public speculation must be treated with the utmost caution. It is impossible to ignore the context of this case, which involves a prominent public family. And Nancy Guthrie is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. In such situations, media coverage intensifies at an exponential rate. Rumors begin to circulate wildly, and the volume of online commentary grows ever louder. But the work of an investigation proceeds at a far more deliberate pace. Cases are not built on speculation. They are constructed piece by piece through corroboration, and corroboration is a process that demands time. The FBI has confirmed the receipt of more than 30,000 tips from the public, a volume that creates both immense opportunity and significant distraction. Every one of those tips has to be carefully reviewed, logged, and assessed for credibility. In parallel, forensic labs are working around the clock to process physical material connected to the case. The financial reward for information that leads to the recovery of Nancy now stands at $100,000. This sum is composed of $50,000 from the FBI, matched by another $50,000 from the family. Such increases in reward money generally occur when investigators believe that public cooperation is critical to generating new, actionable intelligence. This is a strategic decision, not a gesture of desperation. Now, consider another facet of this sprawling investigation. Authorities have also confirmed they are meticulously reviewing all available surveillance footage from neighborhoods within a 5-mile radius, pulling video from both private residences and local businesses. And within that digital dragnet, one particular clip has drawn intense interest. Captured miles away from the victim's home, it shows an unidentified person carrying a backpack remarkably similar in design to the one worn by the enigmatic figure recorded on Nancy's doorstep. While investigators have not publicly confirmed a connection between this individual and the case, they are reportedly scrutinizing the timing of this footage. In this kind of analysis, timing is everything. If it can be established that a vehicle could have traveled between those 2 points within the known window of opportunity, investigators can then deduce the most likely routes. This allows them to focus their search on a trove of other data sources, traffic cameras, and license plate readers, and the unblinking eyes of intersection surveillance systems, all of which can narrow a possible path to a probable one. This is how cases are now solved quietly, through the meticulous analysis of data. This brings us back to the critical shift in the entire narrative of the case. For weeks, the public and the investigation were focused on the specter of a masked stranger. Now, investigators are carefully evaluating a more chilling hypothesis, that the perpetrator was not a stranger, but someone who possessed an intimate knowledge of the home's layout and the victim's daily routine. This single distinction fundamentally alters how the public perceives the crime. Because while random violence is chaos, a targeted event leaves a trail. The critical difference is premeditation. At this moment, no one has been taken into custody, and no official charges have been brought against any individual. Yet, law enforcement sources confirm that a tightening circle of evidence is closing in. And this is precisely why the investigation has evolved beyond a simple missing person case. It has become a matter of identification. We are dedicated to following the facts as they emerge, not the noise of breaking news. We track every development. We verify each update, and when new evidence alters the direction of an investigation, we analyze its implications with clarity, free from conjecture or hyperbole. Because in an investigation of this gravity, precision is paramount. The fact remains, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. Her family persists in their public appeals for information, and Savannah Guthrie has spoken directly to the audience, pleading for cooperation and urging anyone with knowledge to come forward to the authorities. These are carefully measured statements, devoid of any direct accusation. They are pleas for help, and investigators are responding by meticulously constructing a case designed to withstand the scrutiny of a courtroom. Our next segment will delve into the intricate process of digital reconstruction. We will explore how law enforcement deconstructs data from home networks and vehicle computer systems and telecommunication records, piecing together a timeline to see if a suspect's movements align with the physical evidence recovered. Because this new evidence may not appear dramatic, but its power could be absolute. And when investigators announce they have found a suspect, what they often mean is this: the data has revealed a direction, and they are methodically closing the distance. Nancy Guthrie vanished in the pre-dawn hours of February 1st, 2026. In the time that has passed, every moment of her life has been scrutinized, all except for a single critical minute. And that minute, authorities now believe, may be inextricably linked to an individual they are on the verge of identifying. By the second week of the investigation, law enforcement redirected its resources, focusing on a single core objective: reconstructing movement not through theory or rumor, but through data. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has since confirmed that a vast array of digital evidence is undergoing forensic analysis. This evidence encompasses cellular tower records, home network logs, onboard vehicle system data, and geolocation timestamps. Where the physical world leaves a void, the digital footprint often provides the missing pieces. This case would prove to be no exception. The inquiry began with Nancy Guthrie's personal devices. Her phone, tablet, and even her home Wi-Fi router were secured for comprehensive forensic imaging. Specialists in digital forensics create perfect mirror images of these systems before analysis begins, a critical step that preserves every shred of metadata, including connection times, login attempts, hidden background processes, and the full spectrum of network traffic. Authorities have confirmed a chilling silence from Nancy's devices after she arrived home that night. No outgoing calls, no text messages, not one single attempt to dial for help. This digital void is profoundly significant. It suggests one of two terrifying possibilities. Either she was denied the chance to use her phone, or the device was entirely out of her reach. The investigation then expanded outward into the realm of cellular mapping. Law enforcement submitted requests for all cellular tower pings within a defined radius of Nancy's home, concentrating on those crucial early morning hours. Cellular providers maintain detailed connection logs, which reveal every device that has communicated with or pinged their nearby towers. At this stage, investigators are not searching for names. They are hunting for anomalies, unidentified numbers that surface for a fleeting moment before vanishing. A temporary presence demands attention. According to sources close to the investigation, analysts successfully isolated several devices that registered on towers near the Guthrie property, all within the specified window of time. The vast majority of these signals were consistent with the expected patterns of local residential traffic. A handful, however, were not. Those anomalous numbers are now being rigorously traced through subscriber records and their historical movement patterns. This is standard procedure in suspected targeted abductions, where established patterns carry far more weight than a single, isolated event. Concurrently, detectives turn to vehicle telematics. The modern automobile is a rolling repository of data, storing far more information than its owner realizes. Ignition times, door openings, mileage intervals, and in some models, detailed GPS logs. Even vehicles without a subscription navigation service often retain crucial event data within their internal memory. When investigators execute a warrant for a vehicle, they are extracting the entire memory of its onboard computer system. This meticulous process can reveal if a car was in motion during a specific time frame, and even whether its doors were opened or closed. The Sheriff's Department confirmed that at least one vehicle of interest in this case has been subjected to such a warrant. While the findings have not been made public, official statements provide a critical piece of the puzzle. The warrant for the vehicle analysis was requested only after new digital correlations came to light. The timing of that request is significant. When the movement of a vehicle perfectly aligns with unexplained cellular activity, investigators can begin to construct a much stronger timeline of events. In a parallel effort, the neighborhood surveillance canvas intensified, with deputies going door to door across a multi-mile radius. They formally requested access to a web of private security systems, doorbell cameras, driveway recorders, and any device that might hold a clue. In investigations that unfold in suburban landscapes, this private footage often proves more valuable than municipal cameras, as residential systems capture sustained activity, not just fleeting snapshots of traffic. Authorities confirmed they had undertaken the meticulous task of reviewing countless hours of surveillance footage sourced from residences along every potential access route. Their focus, however, extended far beyond the search for a solitary masked figure. They were hunting for anomalies in the mundane, vehicles that materialized more than once, telltale repeated drive-bys, unnaturally slow turns, or headlights extinguished moments before arrival. These are the subtle signatures that construct a behavioral profile. According to official statements, the investigation also delved into the local power grid data. Utility providers keep meticulous records of all service fluctuations and surges. An abrupt change in power usage in an adjacent home lights suddenly activated or cut can sometimes correlate with external movement or the opening of a door. It may seem like a trivial detail. It is anything but. In a case devoid of witnesses, these digital breadcrumbs are forced to become the only testimony available. Inside the residence, the inquiry deepened. Detectives enlisted specialists trained in a discipline known as digital timeline synthesis. This process is a complex fusion of all available electronic data from phones, routers, vehicle logs, and surveillance clips into a single, unified chronology of events. The objective is stark in its simplicity: to identify inconsistencies. If a single device registers activity at 1:12 a.m., yet a corresponding system indicates total inactivity, that void becomes a chasm demanding an explanation. Law enforcement has not revealed the specific nature of the discrepancies they uncovered. They have, however, confirmed that this timeline reconstruction compelled them to re-interview individuals with connections to Nancy. These second interviews are a strategic maneuver. Detectives pit previous statements against the newly established data, measuring a person's spoken accuracy against the unforgiving tick of the timestamp. In investigations of this magnitude, all interviews are recorded, preserved, and analyzed. Every word matters. The specific phrasing matters. How a person references time itself matters. Investigators are trained to detect what they call narrative drift, the small, almost imperceptible shifts in a story over multiple tellings. And it is here that the cold, hard data of the investigation begins to intersect with the complexities of human psychology. When an individual recounts events from memory, the finer details will either remain stable or begin to fracture under pressure. Detectives are tasked with assessing this consistency, all without ever revealing the true evidence they possess. Sheriff Chris Nanos publicly stated that all interviews are conducted with professionalism and that no one has been declared a suspect at this stage. That language is carefully chosen, a deliberate act to preserve the investigation's flexibility. In parallel, the Federal Bureau of Investigation joined local authorities, lending its resources to assist with the data analysis. The involvement of federal agencies significantly expands the technological capabilities of an investigation, particularly in cases that demand complex digital mapping. The FBI also confirmed that their behavioral analysts had been consulted, a unit that does not determine guilt. Instead, it evaluates probability. It dissects indicators of planning. It assesses risk tolerance, and it scrutinizes the subject's knowledge of the surrounding environment. In crimes involving older victims, analysts often focus on a critical distinction. Did the event appear opportunistic, or was it targeted? A directed event reveals careful preparation, a deep knowledge of the victim's routines, and a clear understanding of entry points and security vulnerabilities. These are the elements that now form the core of the ongoing review. Officially, investigators have released a crucial piece of information. There are no confirmed signs of forced entry at the home's primary access points. The statement is carefully calibrated. It does not rule out an unlawful entry. Rather, it suggests that access may have been gained through an unsecured route, or more chillingly, through a sense of familiarity. If force was not a prerequisite for entry, the field of potential individuals narrows considerably. This is the point where the investigation crosses a threshold into the realm of psychology. Individuals who commit premeditated offenses often engage in a form of mental rehearsal. They visualize the sequence of events. They anticipate obstacles in order to minimize risk. and digital evidence can often betray whether such a rehearsal took place. For instance, prior drive-bys captured on neighborhood cameras or cell phone data showing a device lingering near the property in the days leading up to the event. Vehicle logs can indicate a pattern of proximity long before the date in question. While authorities have not publicly confirmed such discoveries, they have verified that all historical location data is under intense scrutiny. Past movement carries immense weight. If a single device appears near the property repeatedly over several days, that device and its owner inevitably become a focal point. Investigators also pivoted to a forensic review of all financial activity. Credit card usage, online transactions, and even subscription renewals can betray a pattern of planning behavior. The purchase of specific items in advance may later align with physical evidence recovered from the scene. Once again, officials have withheld specific details. They did, however, confirm that financial records had been subpoenaed. Every subpoena is a formal legal step that requires judicial authorization. Each request presented to a judge must meticulously demonstrate its direct relevance to the investigation. By the close of the second week, the digital timeline reconstruction had reportedly isolated a much narrower cluster of individuals. Law enforcement is exceptionally precise with its terminology. They refer to these individuals as persons of interest, not suspects, unless criminal charges are imminent. A person of interest is someone whose behavior, proximity, or connections to the case simply require further evaluation. This distinction serves to protect both the integrity of the investigation and the legal standing of the individual. And this brings us to the question of motive. In any investigation, the question of motive looms large, but motive is a conclusion drawn from evidence, not a starting point. Was the catalyst for this event financial, or was it something deeply personal? A targeted act born from a conflict outside the family circle. At this stage, law enforcement remains silent, refusing to publicly commit to any single theory. Behind the scenes, however, a meticulous financial autopsy is underway. Officials have confirmed they are poring over insurance records, estate filings, and a deep archive of personal communications. This is standard procedure, particularly when the victim is of an advanced age and lived independently. But routine should not be mistaken for suspicion. It is simply the signature of a thorough, exhaustive search for answers. The case has also been thrust into the national spotlight, a direct result of Nancy Guthrie's identity as the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. This connection inevitably magnifies the scrutiny. With that scrutiny comes immense pressure, yet investigators have been adamant that the case will be guided by the evidence alone, not by public profile. All the while, the flood of information from the public continues to rise. More than 30,000 individual tips have been officially logged. The FBI's dedicated tip line remains operational, where analysts work around the clock, tasked with separating credible leads from the static of public speculation. This informational triage follows a methodical process: verification, cross-referencing, and then a critical decision, dismissal, or escalation. Every tip that passes this initial filter is then meticulously plotted against the established digital timeline of the case. If a tip references a particular vehicle, investigators immediately review countless hours of surveillance to determine if that vehicle makes an appearance. Should a tip point to a specific individual, detectives cross-reference the claim with cellular presence and other known location records. The vast majority of these tips do not survive this rigorous filtering. A select few do. And when investigators speak of the focus tightening, they are referring to the powerful concept of convergence. Convergence is the moment when disparate threads of an investigation, digital records, surveillance captures, interviews, and physical evidence all begin to point toward a single, unified narrative. The margin for error shrinks. This is the precise stage where the investigation now finds itself. The search is no longer a wide, sweeping net. It has become methodical and intensely focused. And the subsequent phase will be critical, determining if the digital trail is strong enough to support charges or if it will serve to exonerate key individuals entirely. The apathetic march of evidence continues, and with it, the painstaking process of separating hard fact from insidious speculation. As new, verified developments emerge, they are brought into the light with clarity and without the lens of exaggeration. Nancy Guthrie is still missing, yet the mystery surrounding her is no longer a formless void. It is being meticulously reconstructed, minute by painful minute. In the landscape of modern investigations, data is a silent witness that rarely lies. The fundamental question is not whether the truth is buried within the record. The question is who that record is pointing toward. In the majority of missing persons cases, the public is privy to only a sliver of the immense work happening behind the curtain. They see a few stark lines in a press release, a haunting photograph, a number to call. This case, however, refused to follow that quiet pattern. From the very first week, Nancy Guthrie's disappearance exploded into a national headline, plunging the investigation into a new, unforgiving environment, one where every decision, every uttered sentence, and every calculated silence would be judged in real time. This pressure was not a singular force. It was an onslaught from all directions, all at once. National news organizations, anonymous social media accounts posting unsourced updates, and true crime channels prioritizing speed over accuracy. And, most critically, a bitter media dispute that dangerously shifted the narrative's focus away from fact-finding and toward outright accusation. By February 6, 2026, authorities publicly acknowledged they were analyzing a new message connected to the case, carefully scrutinizing it for authenticity. This was a significant detail, for it sent two powerful and contradictory signals simultaneously. Someone was attempting to inject a new narrative into the investigation, and law enforcement could not afford to assume that information was genuine. In a case of this magnitude, such a message could represent a breakthrough lead, a cruel hoax, or a deliberate attempt to misdirect the entire investigation. Investigators are forced to treat all three possibilities as equally viable until one can be definitively proven false. It is the harsh reality of modern true crime coverage. A hungry public demands immediate answers, but investigators cannot operate on the timeline of public demand. They move only on the slow, deliberate pace of verification. The Sheriff's Department and the FBI executed a classic strategy for a case drowning in speculation. They severely restricted what they said publicly, while dramatically expanding what they asked for. In carefully worded official statements, carried by numerous media outlets, investigators issued a broad appeal for video footage from the public, anything capturing vehicles, the flow of traffic, or pedestrians. They were also looking for anything that seemed unusual, covering an expansive date range from January 1st, 2026, through February 2nd, 2026. This request reveals a dual-track investigative strategy. One track focused on the immediate time window of the disappearance. The other track was about laying a foundation. They were searching for people and vehicles that may have appeared in the weeks prior and would not have seemed out of place at the time. But this public appeal served another, more subtle purpose. It effectively externalized a portion of the investigative burden. When a law enforcement agency asks an entire community to scrub a full month of camera footage, it is far from a casual request. It is an acknowledgement that critical evidence may be stored on private systems, beyond the immediate reach of a warrant. It is also a signal that investigators believe patterns of movement, the question of who was near the home, when they were there, and with what frequency these details could prove to be as critical as the events of the night itself. In the face of mounting public pressure, the official language from authorities remained rigorously controlled. They were methodical, refusing to name a suspect or single out any one person of interest. Every public statement was carefully crafted to avoid committing to a specific theory before all the evidence had been painstakingly assembled. It is a form of discipline that is often profoundly misunderstood by the public. To an outside observer, this restraint can appear as indecisiveness. But to the investigators, that same restraint is a shield. It is what protects the integrity of witness interviews. It protects the viability of future court proceedings. And crucially, it protects innocent individuals from the indelible stain of an untested allegation. But such deliberate silence inevitably creates a vacuum. And into that void, other voices rush in, growing ever louder. By early February, a parallel narrative had begun to form, running alongside the official inquiry. A media-fueled story arc took shape, one that centered on Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. And it was here that the public perception of the case fractured. On one side, law enforcement consistently reiterated that they were not releasing the names of any suspects. On the other side, a journalist, Ashley Banfield, leveraged her true crime podcast to disseminate information from an anonymous law enforcement source, effectively framing Nancy's son-in-law as a viable suspect. This was language that spread like wildfire online, echoed and amplified across countless platforms. It was far more than a simple controversy. It evolved into a structural impediment for the investigation itself, because once a person is indicted in the court of public opinion, everything they do is scrutinized as evidence by strangers with no access to the actual case file. In this new reality, normal behavior is rendered suspicious. Silence is interpreted as guilt. Cooperation is viewed as a tactic. The act of hiring a lawyer becomes an admission of culpability. In the harshest of twists, even the expression of grief is seen as suspicious. This toxic public atmosphere can make potential witnesses unwilling to come forward. It can also make sorting through legitimate tips exponentially more difficult, as incoming information begins to reflect online theories instead of genuine, first-hand observations. Law enforcement was acutely aware of this danger. As the Banfield claims proliferated, Sheriff Chris Nanos and his department began to publicly push back. News coverage noted the sheriff's pointed description of the reporting as reckless, warning that it could inflict serious harm on the investigation and on individuals. There is a fundamental reason why law enforcement agencies so rarely attack media coverage head-on. They generally prefer to maintain a functional relationship with reporters, to manage the flow of information without provoking a public confrontation. So, when a sheriff puts his name on the record to formally denounce media coverage, it is a powerful signal that investigators believe the public narrative is actively interfering with the tangible work of the investigation. And the problem was not merely interference. It was also a question of boundaries. The sheriff's department needed to convey a critical message to the public without compromising evidence, that the case was far more complex than a single podcast's claim, and that the public was not entitled to an unverified suspect's name just because the case involved a prominent family. Meanwhile, Banfield only intensified her position. Reports show her repeating the allegation and vocally defending her source, including during a notable interview with Dan Abrams on his SiriusXM program. That interview broadened the conflict, elevating the dispute to a much larger stage and reframing the entire issue as a direct showdown. It became a battle of an anonymous source versus an official denial. This is precisely the trap into which high-profile investigations are so prone to fall. You see, when the story shifts to become about who is lying, the focus inevitably drifts from what truly matters, locating the missing person and identifying those responsible through solid, provable evidence. This is not simply a media issue. It metastasizes into a psychological one, because public accusation fundamentally alters human behavior. People who may hold vital information grow cautious. Some become frightened. Others turn defensive. Many conclude that it is far safer to say nothing at all than to risk becoming the next focal point of obsessive online attention. And that chilling effect has an impact that no investigator can afford to ignore. One of the most telling examples from this case is the way investigators were forced to manage the influx of public tips. The FBI issued a public reward notice for any information that would lead to Nancy Guthrie's recovery or the arrest and conviction of any person involved. Such a notice is more than a simple public appeal for help. It also acts as a filter, because people respond differently when money is on the table. Some who were previously hesitant may come forward. Others will come forward for entirely the wrong reasons. The reward notice guarantees a high volume of tips. The investigators are then left with the monumental task of separating the signal from the noise. This case produced a truly enormous volume, and that volume comes at a cost. Every single tip must be officially logged. Every tip must be cross-referenced against known information. If a tip involves a potential sighting, investigators must determine if the stated location and time align with any verified data. If a tip names an individual, investigators must then assess whether that information stems from a real-world interaction or is merely an echo of online rumor. This is the part of an investigation the public rarely gets to see. Investigators don't just receive leads, they are forced to manage the quality of those leads. When an investigation is thrust into the national spotlight, the official tip line becomes a vortex, pulling in not just facts, but a torrent of public anxiety, raw attention, and at times, deliberate manipulation. Some who call are driven by a genuine desire to help. Others are drawn to the dark allure of becoming part of the story. They repeat fragments of headlines, echoes from viral videos, or sentiments from a comment section. The fundamental work becomes one of sifting through the noise. In this particular case, that sifting process occurred under the intense glare of the media, amplified by the fact that Nancy Guthrie is the mother of a major television personality, Savannah Guthrie. That single connection was the catalyst that instantly transformed a local case into a national obsession. Media coverage relentlessly underscored the family's public profile, drawing in an audience that, prior to this, had likely never even heard of the Catalina foothills. With this heightened attention came an insidious new layer of pressure, the public's expectation of speed. There's a prevailing assumption that a famous case will invariably be solved quickly. The logic seems sound: more resources, more cameras, and more investigators should equate to more urgency. But a high-profile investigation can become mired for the very same reasons it accelerates. Every procedural step is rendered sensitive. Every physical search becomes a public spectacle. Every circulating rumor becomes a potential obstruction. Each release of information is a decision laden with consequence, and every one of those decisions is made while the family at the heart of the tragedy must live under constant public scrutiny. This is the treacherous intersection where the human element collides with the procedural one, and its weight is felt profoundly without any need for graphic detail. For a family to plead for public assistance is one thing. For that same family to be forced to defend itself against public theories is something else entirely. As the public discourse intensified and grew more accusatory, reporting indicated that Sheriff Nanos issued an uncharacteristically forceful statement, unequivocally clearing the Guthrie family and denouncing what he termed a cruel media fixation on them as suspects. A statement of this nature is not routine. It acts as a definitive line drawn in the sand, a signal that investigators were refusing to allow rampant speculation to inflict a second victimization. That singular moment was critical, not because it provided a solution, but because it starkly clarified the stakes. Law enforcement was not just investigating a disappearance. They were now actively managing the public damage being inflicted by a storm of unverified accusations. This is a precarious balance to maintain. If investigators reveal too little, the public rushes to fill the void with its own narratives. Yet if they reveal too much, they risk jeopardizing witness interviews, compromising physical evidence, and ultimately, any future prosecution. Consequently, they must depend on carefully controlled releases of information, a reward notice, a specific request for video evidence, a confirmation that messages are being reviewed, and meticulously worded statements that studiously avoid naming any person of interest. This is why this phase of the story is so vital, because a break in the case does not always refer to forensic work or surveillance analysis. It can also refer to the battle for narrative control. In investigations like this, authorities almost always know far more than they are able to say, while the public often believes far more than has ever been proven. It is within the media space that these two realities collide. The outcome of that collision can either aid the investigation by generating a crucial tip, or seriously harm it by twisting the search for truth into a spectacle. So, for those watching who are invested in these stories for the right reasons, there is a line that must be held. It is about facts first, not speculation, not viral clips, and not anonymous sources, repeated so often they begin to masquerade as truth. Adherence to confirmed reporting and official records is paramount. This is not about building an audience. It is because cases of this magnitude become saturated with noise almost immediately, and a disciplined analysis, one that refuses to trade accuracy for speed, is essential. By the middle of February, investigators were still meticulously reviewing messages and still collecting video footage from the public, all while navigating the fallout from a media war that had fixated on one name, even as the agencies involved refused to put any name on the official record. That immense gap between what the public demands to know and what investigators can legally prove is the space where pressure festers. And pressure alters behavior. It can change what witnesses say. It can even change what people believe they have seen. It accelerates the spread of rumors. It dictates how grieving families are treated, and it fundamentally changes how law enforcement must communicate. Nancy Guthrie's case became a severe test of that entire system, not just the system that locates the missing, but the one that shapes what truth looks like long before a courtroom ever sees it. And that is where this chapter concludes. The necessary next step is not louder coverage. It is quieter proof. The professionals conducting this work understand that the moment they publicly name a suspect, they require something far more substantial than suspicion. They need a case built to withstand the single most difficult question of all. Can you prove it? The first major development in this investigation did not arrive from a press conference. It came from a roadside recovery. On February 12th, investigators found a black glove approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's residence, left in an open area near the edge of a road. The FBI later described it as an item potentially connected to the figure seen in the surveillance imagery. At first glance, a discarded glove might seem utterly ordinary. In the context of a missing person investigation, however, it can be anything but, because a glove is never just a piece of clothing. It can be a silent vessel for trace evidence, capable of harboring microscopic clues, fibers, granules of soil, and crucial biological material. It can even reveal the ghostly imprints of its owner's habits through its patterns of wear. Under the right conditions, it might even allow investigators to estimate the passage of time since it was abandoned in that specific location. The Federal Bureau of Investigation made a public declaration. The glove appeared to be a match for those worn by the figure captured in surveillance footage, and critically, it held a DNA profile. That phrasing is deliberate and cautious. It falls short of claiming the glove belongs to the individual in the video. The statement asserts only that it seems to match what is visible in the imagery and that it contains the genetic signature of an unknown person. This is a critical distinction because in a court of law, appears to match is not definitive proof. It is a thread. And from that single thread, the entire investigation begins to pivot toward new evidence and the shadow of a potential suspect. The question then becomes what investigators can truly learn from an object like this. Once an item of interest is recovered and its existence meticulously documented, it enters the rigid protocol of chain of custody. This protocol ensures the item is sealed, labeled, and tracked through every transfer, creating an unbroken line of accountability essential for its defense in legal proceedings. Only then can the laboratory analysis begin. The initial step is a painstaking visual inspection and documentation. Forensic investigators photograph the glove from every conceivable angle, recording its precise condition and noting any visible anomalies, tears, chemical residues, distinctive markings, or the faintest traces of a manufacturer's tag. The next phase is controlled sampling. A laboratory does not indiscriminately test the entire object. Instead, technicians meticulously focus on the high-contact zones, those areas most likely to have retained usable cellular material. For a glove, this means the fingertips, the inner palm, the wrist seam, and any outer surfaces that show signs of handling. From these minute samples, the process of DNA extraction commences. If a viable sample is obtained, analysts can construct a DNA profile. It is crucial to understand that a profile is not a complete identity. It is a distinct, coded sequence of genetic markers, a unique signature that can be compared against other samples. In this investigation, authorities made 2 pivotal points public. The FBI confirmed that the glove harbored DNA evidence and that it bore a striking resemblance to the gloves worn by the figure in the surveillance recording. Precisely. Later, the Pima County Sheriff's Department announced that the DNA extracted from a glove failed to produce a match in the system, and furthermore, did not match a separate sample discovered at Nancy Guthrie's residence. On the surface, these statements appear contradictory, but they begin to make sense once you grasp the complex reality of a major investigation. There can be more than one glove recovered. There can be multiple DNA samples from different sources. And several distinct profiles can be under analysis simultaneously. A spokesperson for the Sheriff's Department later clarified that the DNA profile from the glove was not the same as the one recovered from inside the home. So, why does the glove remain a central piece of this puzzle? Because investigators are not approaching this as a simple, single test scenario. They are assembling a complex matrix of comparisons. If a glove yields one profile and the residence contains a completely separate one, it could imply the involvement of multiple individuals, or it could suggest that one of the samples is entirely unrelated to the central crime. It could also be the result of contamination, secondary transfer, or some incidental contact that occurred at the property entirely separate from the event. This is precisely why investigators avoid prematurely declaring a DNA match as the final answer. They interpret it not as a conclusion, but as a direction. This leads to a new phase, the path a laboratory takes when CODIS comes up empty. When a DNA profile is generated, the primary route for comparison is the National Criminal DNA Database, CODIS. However, CODIS is not a universal catalog. It only holds profiles gathered under specific legal circumstances, generally linked to criminal arrests or convictions, with rules varying by jurisdiction. If a profile returns no match from CODIS, it doesn't mean the person is a ghost. It simply means their genetic signature is not currently stored within that specific federal database. At this juncture, investigators are left with two primary avenues. First, they expand their comparisons against every other profile collected throughout the course of this specific case. Second, they explore other legal methodologies, which can include the use of commercial genealogical databases, contingent upon departmental policy, warrant stipulations, and the specific rules of the agency. In this very investigation, the Puma County Sheriff's Department confirmed that, with no CODIS match, their focus was shifting toward commercial genealogical databases. This represents a seismic shift in strategy. Commercial genealogy searches rarely identify a suspect directly. Instead, they search for partial matches to distant or close relatives who have voluntarily opted to share their data for law enforcement purposes, depending on that database's specific policies. From these familial connections, investigators begin the arduous work of constructing family trees to systematically narrow the pool of possibilities. This is not an instantaneous solution. It is methodical, painstaking work, and it fundamentally alters the definition of a new suspect. In an investigation driven by genetic genealogy, a suspect doesn't begin as a single individual, but as a nebulous cluster, a family line, a geographic region, a collection of male relatives falling within a certain age bracket. The focus then sharpens, one branch of the family tree at a time. And why is this methodological approach so vital to understanding this case? Because the new evidence is not what one might expect. It is not a dramatic, last-minute confession or a startling revelation captured on camera. It is a quiet, forensic pathway that has the potential to yield a name. And in the world of true crime investigation, this is often how the most profound answers emerge. They arrive not with a bang, but quietly, through the sterile gates of a laboratory and the careful execution of policy. This is a reality that often escapes public understanding of the pace of justice. When investigators report that they are waiting on DNA results, they could be waiting for anything from the initial confirmation of extraction. The meticulous process involves developing a profile, running quality checks, performing comparison analyses, and retesting every result for verification, all before a final legal review clears it for genealogical submission. In this particular case, local reports indicated that law enforcement was awaiting the final confirmation of DNA tests on a pair of gloves discovered near the Guthrie residence. But this period of waiting should not be mistaken for inaction. It signifies the laboratory is deep within its complex analytical matrix. Consider the updates to official flyers and the true meaning behind suspect details. When the Federal Bureau of Investigation issues or revises a missing person bulletin, every single word is meticulously chosen. These documents are engineered to achieve two primary objectives: to trigger public recognition and to generate relevant tips. According to local news sources, the release of new surveillance imagery and video prompted the FBI to update the flyer for Nancy Guthrie. Updates to these bulletins will commonly incorporate new details, such as a refined physical description of the individual captured in the footage, specifics of their clothing, any items they were carrying like bags or packs, a last known direction of travel, and updated tip line information. None of this constitutes proof, but it serves a critical function, helping someone in the public connect a fleeting memory to the hard facts of a case. Perhaps a neighbor who recalls seeing someone dressed in a similar fashion. or a motorist who registered a person walking in an unusual place. It could even be a store clerk who vaguely remembers a specific transaction. This is the crucial process by which cold, impersonal visual data is transformed into the warmth of human recognition, and that recognition is what ultimately leads to a name. This is the moment investigators are working toward, not a dramatic public accusation, but something far more valuable. What they seek is a privately identified lead, a person of interest they can then rigorously vet through records, interviews, and the lawful collection of evidence. Regarding the situation at the residence, law enforcement has been clear. In active investigations, rumors multiply with blinding speed, particularly concerning searches and detentions. The Sheriff's Department has publicly clarified the following points. When investigators execute a search warrant at any residence, every individual inside is, by standard procedure, technically detained. This is done to ensure officers can conduct their search safely and without interference. This clarification is vital, as it stops the public from interpreting standard protocol as an admission of guilt. A detention during a search is not the same as an arrest. It is about maintaining control of the scene. The distinction is critical for protecting the investigation and preventing online misinformation from hardening into perceived fact. But why do investigators reduce public updates precisely when the evidence becomes most sensitive? As the evidence grows more technical and complex, particularly when it involves forensic genealogy and intricate lab comparisons, law enforcement agencies will deliberately limit their public statements. Recent reports noted that on February 24th, the Pima County Sheriff's Department announced it would restrict further updates unless significant new information warranted a public release. This is a standard tactic when an investigation approaches a critical juncture. You cannot allow public chatter to contaminate or shape the memories of potential witnesses. You must prevent false confessions and the inevitable appearance of those merely seeking attention. Most importantly, you do not want the person responsible to learn the nature of the evidence you now hold. The time for talk is over. The focus shifts entirely to proof. So what can the public do to genuinely help? Investigators have made a single request, one that is both sweeping and precise. Provide footage, not speculation, not theories. Footage. Local news outlets confirm the department issued alerts to residents within a 2-mile radius, asking for any surveillance footage from the period covering January 1st through February 2nd. A request of this scale suggests investigators believe something critical was captured on camera. They believe the preparation for the crime may have left digital breadcrumbs, perhaps vehicles passing the location repeatedly, forming a pattern that only becomes visible once you know exactly what you are looking for. If one is watching for the signal amid the noise, this is the point where an investigation truly pivots. It doesn't turn on rumors, but on lab results, on precise legal maneuvers, and on the patient, methodical work that transforms an unknown genetic profile into a tangible human identity. And once investigators possess that identity, every other piece of the puzzle becomes testable. Was this individual anywhere near the area? Did they have a legitimate reason to be there? Do their digital footprints and physical movements align with the known timelines of the case? Is there a link between them and the recovered evidence? The glove is not the final chapter. It is a door, a forensic gateway, and the investigation is now moving through it. When a case of this magnitude breaks into the public consciousness, something almost inevitably happens. Someone makes contact. Sometimes the communication is genuine. Sometimes it is a deliberate falsehood. Other times it is merely an individual attempting to hijack the spotlight. And on rare occasions, it is the person responsible reaching out in an attempt to control the narrative they have created. In early February of 2026, authorities acknowledged they were evaluating a message that had surfaced in connection to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Public reports carefully framed it as a message that was linked to potential kidnappers, but even within that phrasing, a deep uncertainty is deliberately embedded. In that sentence, the word potential is doing an immense amount of work. Because until law enforcement can confirm who sent that message and for what reason, it is not evidence of a crime. It is only a signal, an indication that someone, somewhere, desperately wants to be heard. And that moment is critical. It is critical because the first communication often marks the beginning of the first psychological contest in a high-profile investigation. Investigators are forced to make rapid decisions, yet they cannot afford to act on emotion. For investigators, every communication must be treated as a potential minefield. A snare for the family, a snare for the public, and a carefully laid snare for the investigation itself. This is what the world first heard. News of the message entered the public domain through the family's formal statements and the inevitable crush of media coverage that followed. Savannah Guthrie, NY's daughter and the co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, released a video plea to the world. In the reporting on that footage, the family acknowledged that a message had been received, and they affirmed their willingness to pay for NY's safe return. A declaration of that magnitude is never made casually. When families step before the cameras in cases of this nature, it is typically because they believe a real possibility exists that the person watching will yield to pressure, or because investigators theorize that the public appeal might provoke a reaction that generates a new lead. But the strategy is fraught with peril. The moment you announce, "We will pay," you open the floodgates to opportunists, to cruel hoaxers, who are only after money. You invite those who crave attention, and you invite saboteurs who want nothing more than to send the entire investigation into a tailspin. This is precisely why investigators approach every communication as a forensic object. It is a thing to be tested, not to be believed. Then came the story of the ransom note, along with details that could be verified around the same period. An entertainment media outlet reported receiving an alleged ransom demand for a substantial amount of Bitcoin, claiming the figure was in the millions and providing a specific digital address. The report stated that they had confirmed the address was active. And here lies the critical distinction the public often fails to grasp. Verifying that a Bitcoin address exists is profoundly different from verifying that the sender is authentic. A Bitcoin address can be generated by anyone, anywhere, in a matter of minutes. So, investigators do not stop at "the address exists." They delve deep into the blockchain. They scrutinize whether the address has any history of prior activity. They track digital footprints to see if the address was created and disseminated in connection with other scams. They establish surveillance, monitoring whether funds move through it, and they architect controlled pathways so that if money does change hands, it leaves an indelible trail. This explains why cryptocurrency demands are not an automatic sign of sophistication. In many instances, they reveal profound carelessness. And because cryptocurrency is not truly invisible, its movements are recorded, and every transaction becomes another line on the map that investigators can follow. This is the central tension in this chapter of the story. A message can project an aura of power, but it can also be the very thing that exposes the sender. What must law enforcement decide in the first moments after authorities learn of a message tied to a missing person case? Behind the scenes, a cascade of immediate decisions unfolds. Decision 1. Is this message direct, or is it secondhand? A communication sent to the family is one thing. A message delivered to a media outlet is another. A message posted anonymously online is something else entirely. The more degrees of separation between the sender and the investigator, the higher the risk of distortion. Decision 2. Is the sender demanding money, or are they attempting to control behavior? Financial demands are critical, but so are instructions like, do not call the police, do not go public, leave town, wait, come alone, or use a specific device. These commands are often more informative than the demand itself. They reveal what the sender fears. On to decision 3. Is there proof of life? Families will almost always ask for this basic verification. Investigators demand it. Public reporting surrounding this case made it clear that the family's unwavering position was that they needed confirmation that Nancy was truly being held before any other steps could be taken. This is not simply an emotional need. It is a practical one, because hoaxers will demand payment without offering a shred of proof. A genuine offender may also refuse to provide proof, but that refusal is, in itself, a data point. Every response and every refusal becomes a data point. On to decision 4. Does engaging help or harm the situation? In some cases, investigators will advise the family not to respond publicly at all. In other instances, they will coordinate a public message where every word is meticulously chosen. When families speak without that coordination, They can unintentionally disclose what investigators know or, more dangerously, what they do not know. They can also trigger the sender to alter their tactics. This is why, when a family goes public with a powerful offer such as, "We will pay," you can assume investigators are watching the aftermath with microscopic intensity. Not because they seek drama, but because they are seeking a reaction. The sheriff's posture was one of cautious optimism, conveyed through controlled language. In early coverage, the sheriff expressed a guarded belief that Nancy could still be alive. That posture, reported publicly, is a fusion of hope and strategy. It keeps the public engaged in the case. It keeps the tips flowing in. It avoids locking the investigation into a single, predetermined outcome. A statement of that kind is engineered to keep the case active in the public consciousness. But it also performs a second, more covert function. If the person responsible is watching, a statement like that can exert enormous psychological pressure on them to communicate again, or it can force them into making a mistake. Investigators are trained to watch for exactly that moment of vulnerability. This is why messages rarely advance a case in the way that people think. When a message becomes public, viewers often presume it signifies that the case is about to break wide open. On rare occasions, it does. But usually, it does not, because most of these communications are messy. They fail to include verifiable details, and they merely recycle information that is already circulating in the news. The communications are defined by their ambiguity. Threats are kept broad, the focus is purely financial, and every effort is made to leave no discernible trail. This forces investigators to hunt for the elements the sender cannot consciously conceal. The invisible signatures hidden within their linguistic patterns, peculiar word choices, recurring turns of phrase, and even idiosyncratic spelling errors. The digital forensics revealed a trail of electronic breadcrumbs, technical fingerprints unique to the hardware, the specific type of device, any metadata embedded within the upload, and the very pathway it took through the network. A psychological clock began to form from the timing of the messages, revealing distinct temporal patterns, the precise windows when the sender was active, and the calculated quickness of their replies. They examine whether certain hours are studiously avoided and search for geographic leakage revealed through cellular routing, a slip-up with a VPN, or a critical account login. Then there are the behavioral tells. How do they react to public statements? Does their rhetoric escalate, or do they deliberately stall for time? Even a message laundered through the media can be embedded with clues, and investigators pursue these leads with methodical silence. It is this silent, painstaking work that often creates the public perception of inactivity. But beneath the surface, a great deal is unfolding. It is simply happening out of sight. In this unseen battleground, the family's public pleas were never just expressions of grief. They were instruments of targeted communication, carefully engineered to penetrate the isolation of the person holding Nancy, or to stir the conscience of someone who knows something, yet has remained silent. Public reports characterized Savannah's video message as pointedly direct. It acknowledged receipt of their message, affirmed the family's intention to comply with financial demands, and requested a channel for further contact. Subsequent media coverage detailed another family-facing video, this one urging anyone with involvement or knowledge to come forward. In all of this, the critical element is tone. In scenarios like this, families are almost universally counseled to avoid any hint of threat in their public appeals. This advice is not given because such anger is incomprehensible, but because overt hostility can inject a dangerous unpredictability into the situation. Families are instead guided to select language that deliberately leaves a door open. This opening is not created for the offender's comfort. It is a tool of leverage. The calculation is that if the responsible party believes a pathway out still exists a viable way to engage, they are more likely to make contact again. And every single instance of communication exponentially increases the probability of a traceable error. This brings us to why investigators despise public deadlines. Among the details circulating in public reports about the alleged ransom messages were two classic elements: immense financial demands and imposing deadlines. For the viewing public, a deadline injects a powerful sense of urgency. For investigators, however, that same deadline creates a cascade of problems. It forces a family's hand, compelling them to act with a speed where mistakes are inevitable, particularly when large sums of money are in play. Investigators will always seek to decelerate the pace, even when a message demands immediate action. They achieve this through meticulously controlled responses and by issuing demands for verification. They slow the tempo by compelling the sender to repeat themselves, because it is in the act of repetition that the cracks in a facade begin to appear. A fraudster might be able to craft a single, convincing message. It is profoundly more difficult to sustain a coherent deception across multiple exchanges. A genuine perpetrator can maintain a consistent narrative, but even that consistency can inadvertently reveal damning patterns over time. In either scenario, controlled engagement is the key. This is also where Nancy Guthrie's case diverges sharply from the norm, the role of major platform media coverage. When the subject of a missing person case is intimately connected to a national television anchor, the informational reach is instantaneous and immense. Millions of individuals, living nowhere near Tucson, suddenly become familiar with the name, the face, and the fundamental details of the case. This level of coverage is invaluable. More eyes can produce that one critical tip, but it also unleashes a severe side effect. When a case achieves this level of visibility, a second wave of false leads is almost guaranteed. Investigators must then shield their tip lines from being inundated by individuals simply echoing theories from the internet. Their focus must expand to protect the family from opportunistic scams, to shield potential witnesses from harassment, and to guard crucial evidence from public exposure. This is precisely why official law enforcement messaging becomes so tightly controlled. It is not an indication of indifference. It is a necessary defense, because the entire case becomes fragile when buried under the very noise where a profile of a new suspect begins to take form. Here, we must examine how this stage of the investigation proceeds, while being careful not to make assertions that law enforcement itself has not. When the public hears the phrase, "new suspect found," the mind conjures an image of a name appearing on a screen. But an investigation does not begin with a name. It begins with a process of narrowing. And in the communication-driven phase of an inquiry, that narrowing process typically originates from one of two sources. The first is a communication containing a piece of information that only the true perpetrator could possibly know. A detail never reported by the news, a specific fact that has been deliberately withheld from the public. The second source is a communication that can be technically traced, an error in transmission, the reuse of a digital account, a logged-in device, a discernible pattern. It is critical to note that at this stage, authorities had not publicly identified the sender of any message as a confirmed perpetrator. Reporting underscores that even at the time of Savannah Guthrie's plea, it was not confirmed whether the message originated from a genuine abductor. That is the only responsible way to frame the situation. Why is this distinction so crucial? Because that level of accuracy is what separates a documentary investigation from a rumor mill. Therefore, the new direction in this case is not a public accusation. It is the quiet, seismic shift of communications becoming a new current in the stream of evidence. A current that can point toward an individual, even without a single disturbing detail being revealed. The gravity of this moment is palpable. A family is no longer just waiting. They are being profoundly tested, assessed by silence, scrutinized by claims, probed by messages whose authenticity remains a phantom, and haunted by the knowledge that every public utterance could detonate the entire situation. That degree of pressure warps an individual. It fundamentally alters how they communicate. It redefines how they experience sleep. It corrodes the very foundation of whom they trust. It also transforms the investigative process itself, compelling authorities to manage the volatile human psychology and the cold, hard data in tandem. When a message infiltrates a case, it clarifies nothing. It merely adds another cryptic layer, another potential corridor to the truth, or another calculated maneuver to obscure it completely. If you are here for the unadulterated narrative, for verified reporting, transparent sourcing, and an absolute rejection of rumor, then this is the definitive account. This is not about generating hype, it is about meticulous follow-through. Because in cases of this nature, the most significant breakthroughs seldom happen in the public eye. They unfold when a single message multiplies, turning into a chain of communication until the sender inevitably errs, or until a true witness can no longer endure their silence. As of this moment, these are the established, On-the-record facts. Public records confirm that the family has acknowledged receiving a communication tied to the case and subsequently issued a public appeal, affirming their willingness to pay for Nancy's safe return. Public records also confirm that a purported ransom note demanding a payment in Bitcoin was delivered to a media outlet. But the authenticity of any such communication is not confirmed by its mere existence. Public records verify that the law enforcement investigation is proceeding, though it is shrouded in carefully chosen and cautious official language. These public statements include remarks that suggest a hope that Nancy may still be alive. That is where this chapter of known facts concludes. It ends not with closure, but with immense pressure, because once a case transitions into this communications phase, the next development is seldom influenced by what the public believes. It is entirely about what the sender does next, and whether the investigation can leverage that action. Can they transform that next move into something that stands quietly, cleanly, and beyond all doubt?